Good afternoon or evening, and welcome to Writers Unplugged. This is a series that will air throughout the year. Chance to hear your favorite writers, perhaps new to you writers, in conversation as if you were eavesdropping on them in a coffee shop. My name is Jen Jumba. I'm a librarian at the main branch of the Cleveland Public Library. And one of my favorite things to do besides reading is talking to writers. It's an opportunity to get to know their craft, what inspires their stories, where they like to write, essentially getting to know them better and seeing them as human beings and not just the name on the spine of a book. And we are so lucky to have Christina McDonald joining us this afternoon or evening, depending on where you're watching us from. So before we get started, I want to mention a few housekeeping notes. To find out who else is visiting Writers Unplugged, both virtually and in person, visit cpl.org, and then you can see upcoming authors listed under events and classes. And Max Back's Books on Coventry, it's our favorite and wonderful independent bookstore, has copies of Christina's books for you. But a brief introduction to Christina. Christina McDonald is the USA Today and Amazon Charts best-selling author of These Still Black Waters, Do No Harm, Behind Every Lie, and The Night Olivia Fell, which has been optioned for television by a major Hollywood studio. She lives in London, England, so it's evening there for her with her husband, 2 sons, and their dog, Tango. With every book that Christina writes, I always find myself thinking, what would I do? She does a masterful job of rattling those of us who are concrete thinkers by capturing the many facets that make things complicated, complex, and then that topic is experienced by human beings. Her latest book, These Still Black Waters, is no exception and challenges the concept of whether we are all good or all bad, or if we can be more than the worst thing we've ever done. And I've been lucky and gotten to know Christina, and all I can say is she is one of the good ones, whose kindness extends beyond her writing on the page. Christina is joining us from her home near London, so there's a bit of a time difference, and we're excited to have you here this afternoon/evening. If you have questions, please put them in the chat, and I'll make sure to ask her. So please join me in a warm welcome to Christina McDonald.
Hello.
Hey.
What an amazing welcome. Thank you so much for that, Jen.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Oh, no way. That's kind of how I was beforehand, like fangirl in check. So we're going to talk today about your latest, which is These Still Black Waters. I know you probably have.
Yeah.
It's a fabulous book. And so often writers are asked to describe their book, whether it's in 5 words or in 2 sentences. But I'm curious what your pitch was to your editor, publisher to start this book.
Oh, that's a really good question. That's so far back now. I don't even know if I remember, but it wouldn't have been 5 words because I was actually pitching new agents. So I went out to get a new agent with this book. So it was the whole query letter. So it was the back of the book, the back synopsis. So at that stage, when I first wrote the original first draft of this book, it was almost entirely from Neve's point of view.
Okay.
So Neve is one of the main characters, and then there's now another new main character, and that is Jess. But Jess was a very small part of the first draft of the book. So the original story was very much focused around Neve, a woman who was running away from a traumatic incident, a traumatic home invasion at her house. So she goes to her childhood summer home to try to escape and get some peace and quiet. And while she's there, second day there, a body turns up in the backyard in the lake behind her house. And so she's like, well, obviously she's not going to get very much peace and quiet here.
No, absolutely not. So let's talk a little bit and introduce, those of us who are watching and listening to these 2 characters. So Neve, you talked about kind of where she comes from and kind of her background that leads her to this house on the lake. Can you talk a little bit about Jess?
Yeah. So when I first wrote the story, Jess was she was the detective that was investigating the story. And she was very much like a side character. I mean, she was a secondary protagonist, but she was kind of a side character, mainly to put pressure on Neve and that journey of finding out who that body was, how that body had shown up in her backyard. But when I went out on, when my agent took this book out on submission to publishers and I got a new agent, a new editor signed me, the editor was like, so what do you think about making this into a series? And I was like, that's an amazing idea. But to do that, we had to dig deeper into Jess and to find out more about her. So I changed her from being a third person character to a first person character. So her point of view was first person. And I really dug into her backstory. And I just wanted to find out more about her and how Neve would kind of learn from her, how they would come to these realizations at the end of the book together, that you can be more than the pieces of yourself. You are a whole. But there can also be pieces of you, you know, so we can always have like these parts where we make it's about choices, right? It's about choices and consequences and how they form the person that we are. And so I was trying to make Jess be the person who would teach Neve that. And I think they both learn it at the end. Yeah,
that's kind of how they teach each other.
Yeah, exactly. So that's how Jess developed is she started out as a secondary character. But then I really dug into her and her backstory and the trauma that she's also suffered. And that's how I kind of came up with her character as well. And I love her. I think she's a total, you know, just cool chick that is broken, but so strong. And yeah, I love her. I think she's possibly, I mean, it's hard to choose a favorite character, but she's certainly one of them now.
She is. She was, you know, one of my favorites reading the book. So I'm joined by Amazon charts bestseller and USA Today bestseller, Christina McDonald. We're talking about These Still Black Waters, your latest book. You know, when you talk about digging deep into the character, what does that look like? Like, how do you kind of, I mean, because we know I don't think she's real, but feels like she is based on your writing. But how does that process evolve for you?
So I always start out with a character want and a character need. And the character want is obviously their external goal, what they want to do, which in this case is solve a case. But their internal need is something a little bit more vague. It's something that is driven by their past, the ghost in their past, the trauma or whatever they've suffered in their past that basically colors their entire vision, how they look at the world. And so their entire perspective, their entire point of view shifts and changes because of that trauma or that whatever it is that happens.
Yeah, it's their life experience. You can't not.
And I mean, in real life, there's 100 things that can happen to a person, but in a book, we kind of focus on, one main thing. So for me, it was really kind of digging into a past that would have really affected my character and create the person that I needed her to be in order to bounce off of Neve. So Jess was very much created because of Neve. Neve was first. But once I did start thinking about how they would play off of each other and the things they would learn from each other, I started digging into that internal need of what she needed to learn and different ways that I could torture her and make it really, really hard for her.
Challenges or that she faces. But she is cool. I mean, she rides a motorcycle, which is like ridiculously cool. She has.
It's hilarious because I'm terrified of motorcycles. I would never ride a motorcycle.
I did once.
I have, and I don't. It's scary.
It is very scary. And even though I was like on the back.
Yeah.
It's still very scary.
No, I was on the back. Yeah. My brother was driving. It was terrifying. Yes. But she just was that way to me. She was this woman who, and obviously she's been in a really horrific car accident. I hope I'm not giving any spoilers away. But so I was imagining, like, if you've been in a really, really traumatic car accident, would you really want to get back in a car? Like,
I don't know. I want to be like drive a bubble or something, but
maybe a motorcycle. Would that be? She's free out in the open, so everybody reacts to trauma differently. So I was just kind of thinking of these things, and some of the kind of characteristics and just the ways that she is. They just come to me. I can't even define why. It's just something that pops in my head, and I'm like, yeah, that fits. And other times I'll be like watching somebody ride a motorcycle down the road and I'll be like, my character needs to do that,
That's interesting. So you're constantly aware of your surroundings and people and
constantly watching. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not
Even as
creepy
a
at all.
kid, I was one of those kids who was like standing on the edge of the playground, kind of watching everybody play, but not really playing very much. I
Yeah.
liked to watch, and I still do. I'm very much like I don't participate right away. I kind of get the lay of the land first, and I watch.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Did you ever stop to think when you were writing this? Because you talked a little bit about how life is a series of choices, right? And what's referred to as the butterfly effect,
Yeah, yeah,
where one thing that you do ends up impacting something else, which impacts
yeah,
something else. And then, the path goes a completely different direction or influences somebody in a way that you didn't
yeah.
possibly imagine.
Yeah, I do. I think, and I don't know if you've seen that movie. I saw that movie years ago and I
Yes.
absolutely loved it. And it has always stuck with me that like, what if, yeah, everything you do has consequences. But then I'm
Right.
not sure if I do believe that in such a black and white way, because I do think that sometimes we end up, maybe we go different paths, but we do end up at the same destination. So maybe we'll have a different journey, but we get to the same place. I
Right.
don't know. But yeah, I do think about it, and I
Yeah.
think it very much affects my writing and the characters that I build, because I'm like, well, if you hadn't made this choice, then maybe this wouldn't have happened. and
Uh,
and how will that affect you in the future? So yeah, I
right.
overanalyze my characters.
That's okay. I'm an overthinker, so I get it. So I'm joined in conversation with Christina McDonald this afternoon of These Still Black Waters. So, you talk a little bit in the beginning, the opening page, about um, darkness and equating it with the unknown and the unknown until something crosses into the light of awareness.
Yeah. So that's about the subconscious.
Okay.
So I think sometimes we make choices that we don't consciously make. We just kind
Right.
of do it, and I do it all the
Right.
time when I'm writing, when I'm creating my characters, even in
Yeah.
my daily life, like when I'm getting my kids ready for school, like we're just on autopilot. And I think sometimes choices that we make can be made subconsciously.
Yeah.
And it takes some time and some maybe introspection to like look inside of ourselves and go, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
What is my thought process here?
Yeah.
So for example, I was getting really annoyed about having to go to the gym. I have this rule that I have to go to the gym 3 times a week, which I love. I love the gym, but I was
Once you
starting
get
to feel
there.
like, pardon?
Once you get there.
Yeah, but I walked
Yeah.
to the gym and then I
Oh,
realized that I hated going, and I stopped and thought about it for a minute. The reason why I hated going is because my feet were always getting wet. I live in London, it rains a lot. And I
it's
don't like
raining here
to get
today.
with my feet wet. So I was like, well, I'll just drive. Like, what is my problem? But it took me some time to actually stop and think about it. All of that thought process started out
Yeah.
subconscious and then moved into the conscious. So I think that there's some of that going on in my characters as well, is that they make
Right.
these decisions consciously versus subconsciously.
Right. It's really interesting. And I think I've said this before with other writers, that I think that's one of the gifts of reading a book, is being able to see inside the character's head, to
Yeah,
explore
yeah,
that thought process versus seeing things on a big screen, which is still wonderful and great and is still,
yeah,
an art form. But sometimes you don't get that internal dialogue that you do
exactly.
with
Yeah,
Neve and with Jess, to kind of understand why
yeah.
they're doing, even if they're not aware of why they're doing. Right.
And I think that's why I prefer reading over movies. Like, I don't really watch a lot of movies, or I mean, I've started since the pandemic, I think I'm probably watching a bit more TV, but
Yeah.
I prefer books. I prefer reading because it's just, yeah, it's right there and I get an inside look.
Yeah. Deanne says hello, and it's nice to see you. She's here to
Hi,
support you.
Deanne. Oh,
Yeah,
so lovely you're here.
yeah, absolutely. You also talk a little bit in your book about mundane adjectives, that people use to describe when they don't know the inside of the person.
Mm,
And I think that's really kind of interesting, that this whole who we project ourselves to be versus who we are, and
yeah.
why we're not always, I guess, as authentic.
Yeah,
So,
and I think, we all do that. Like,
mhm.
even the most open people, we have, you know, our inner circle who will
Yeah.
maybe act a little bit different around. And then we have
Yes.
our kind of medium circle. And we all have these circles of people around us, from our families to our friends to, or maybe our work colleagues to the general public. And we
Right.
present different faces to all of them.
Yeah.
And, you know, like right now I'm on this show chatting to you, and I seem outgoing, and I'm not particularly shy or anything, but I'm probably not as outgoing in real life as maybe I come across now. Like I'd be a lot more thoughtful and quiet.
Right.
Because
That quiet observer to get the lay of the land. I got you.
Yeah. So I think that we put different faces forward for different circumstances and different people. And then that maybe makes us try to, I suppose, judge people maybe is too harsh of a word, but maybe we just frame them in the context of what we're thinking they are, whereas we're not getting the whole picture.
Right.
And maybe we use these mundane adjectives to say this person is X.
No, I think you're 100% right. And I think that plays out with both Neve and with Jess in terms of how they look at things. And I mean, it could be considered, I mean, implicit bias, right? Just shaped on your own life experiences that then translates to somebody else. But to me, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
So,
it is to me too. I'm always interested in the way the mind works and the way people are, and you know, like what's under the surface. Like who is everybody under the surface? And I want to get to know my characters because I want to know, like, who are you under the surface?
Well, absolutely. And I think that's the great gift of your stories that you've written, is that you do that so well so that the reader understands why, which I think is incredibly fascinating, because there's always like a means to an end. And sometimes if you were just facts, you know, this person did this and hurt this person. But once you start to understand why, then you realize, like, as humans, we're kind of complex. Like, we're not all good. We're not all bad. And sometimes we do a bad thing for a good thing.
Yeah.
You know, so it's complicated.
I think humans are endlessly fascinating. And I wanted to study psychology.
I was going to ask you. I bet that was.
I did, and I'm really, really fascinated by it. I am really fascinated by it. I don't know. I went into journalism instead, and then I just kind of never went back to study psychology. But it was kind of an interest and a goal of mine when I was younger, and still now. And I think that's because I'm interested in people and how they react and how their motivations are so different and how we view things so differently. And I think, you know, this has become even more true in politics, for example. Like, people view things really differently. And I think that if we could all have a little bit of grace and understanding, maybe things wouldn't be so toxic.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I think the interesting thing in your book, so we're talking to best-selling writer Christina McDonald, These Still Black Waters, is looking at the characters, you know, Neve and Jess, and they're the way they are, and then something happens and it changes how they approach things, right? So like, we think we're one way, you know, and doing something, and then something happens to us that completely alters, you know, the next series of choices that we make. If life is about choices, I've always made these choices kind of consistent with who I am, and then something traumatic happens, which totally flips the script, and then the decisions you make end up being different.
Yeah, completely. And I hope that I can always do that in my books, because I think that comes with having compassion and understanding for the characters and for just people in general. And and that's what I try to do, is like really delve under the surface and look at them compassionately, I guess is the best word. Yeah.
I think you mentioned the word earlier, grace, right? It's just, you know, some people are just doing the best they can.
Yeah.
You know, outside of a story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
whether they're my characters or the world, I think most people, everybody is just trying to do the best they can, and they're making these decisions, but they're often colored by their past or their mood or whatever. And it's I think, grace for my characters is what I hope people will have when they read the whole story.
Yeah, no, it's a fabulous story. Can I talk a little bit with you about, you know, why you chose to tell it from two points of view? I mean, first, I know that Jess wasn't like a main character, but became part of the story, but alternating points of view.
Yeah. So I love writing from two points of view. And I think in all of my books I have done. This one is the first where I've written 3 points of view. And the reason why is because I think that it's so nice to see how characters learn from each other, but also it just from a technical point of view, like writing a character who bounces off of another character to be able to flip that chapter and it ends on a cliffhanger, and then you go to a different character still going, wait, what happened in that propels the reader forward. It propels me
forward.
Why
my laundry wasn't done. It's why I had cereal for dinner. Yeah.
So I love those kinds of books as a reader. So I really like to write that as well from a technical point of view of like, it just adds tension and suspense. But yeah, I just, in terms of the characters, I think it adds more character development when they can each learn something from each other, and they're not strictly the protagonist and they're not strictly the antagonist. They're each other's antagonist, you know? So I think that just adds, for me, greater depth to the characters in terms of writing, but also in terms of reading. So that's why I do it. It's no like magical reason, I guess. It's more like,
no, I think it's terrific. No, and I think it's great because they're experiencing similar events, but because you're telling them from 2 different perspectives, this enriches the reader's understanding of everything that's at play, so that those of us who might be concrete thinkers, these are like black and white, understand things are, there are, shades of gray. There are things that, can't always be one or the other, that sometimes it's a whole duality of life, right? Like 2 opposite things can be true at the same time. And
yes, exactly.
It's something that causes tension, with people.
And this is the first time I've written that 3rd point of view.
I was going to ask you about
like the killer's point of view. And that was weird. Wow. I was like, oh, should I add this? Like, it's a bit dark.
a bit. The opening line. Dare we go with the opening line of your book?
Read it.
Hold on. Oh, I have to put my glasses on, so we're cheating. So the body cooled quickly on the ground beside me. First line of a book, I'm like, oh, right. It's like a second, you read it and then you realize, wait a second, these words are in italics. This is a different point of view. And so you had to kind of like jump in the brain of somebody who.
Yeah, actually that chapter was the first thing that I wrote. The first scene that I had in my head was that scene.
In the dark woods where the ground is soft and there's a body cool. Oh. So I'm glad we're friends and not enemies. That's all I'll say.
I just had this scene in my head. And quite often when I write a book, it does all revolve around one scene that comes to me, and I just kind of close my eyes and I write the scene. And then I'm like, right, what is the book about now? And I'll put that scene wherever it needs to be. But this one happened to be right at the beginning. And it was so clear and vivid to me. It wasn't even a dream. It was just a scene that came to my mind. And I was like, I want to write why this person did that, And so I really, and even with my killer, I want to know why, what is their motivation? Because yes, I suppose you can say that people do kill for no reason whatsoever. But most of the time there are reasons. And certainly in fiction, we need to show it, So I wanted to kind of delve into that killer's point of view, but also their humanity of like, well, how did they get to that point? Because people aren't born killers. I think.
God, I hope not.
Hope not.
Hope not. Yeah. So I'm joined in conversation this evening. Oops, bookmark falling out. With Christina McDonald, a best-selling writer of These Still Black Waters. So throughout the story, and I just realized I'm going to use the word undercurrent in a book about water. Did not think that through. But there's this undercurrent, this theme of the known versus the unknown.
Yes. That
comes across, and whether we need to see things to believe things, and just intrinsically how we feel about things, even though we don't always articulate it.
Yeah, I think so. Because Jess is a detective, the way she views the world is quite factually, quite black and white, you know. So
girl.
yeah. So she has a problem. It's hard to answer this question without giving away
exactly. I know
some like twists there, but she has a problem believing in these things that can't be real, and so she doubts herself.
Right.
So it's hard to answer that without really giving away the she's seeing things that traumatize her, and she questions that. And so throughout the whole book she's kind of questioning, am I really seeing this thing? Is it real? And what is real? And there's also this kind of question she has in her mind about, like, if you can believe in things you can't see, then is there truth in religion, you know, in anything that you can't see? Like, can these things be real? You know?
And as a detective, even though she's very much factual, a lot of times detectives will talk about they have a gut feeling on something, right? So there's not a fact to support it, right? So that adds a layer in terms of which direction investigations go, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's an aura.
Speaking of aura, share everybody with when we've asked. You've been asked several times, where do you get your ideas for the story from? And you say.
So I say it comes from an aura. I have a t-shirt here. The aura is the story. I don't know if you can read it. So, and I love that. I love that so much. When I come up with a story idea, it's not anything that's like concrete or factual. It's more like something ephemeral that kind of almost floats around me. And that sounds really woo-woo. I don't mean for it to be, but it's more that this story is a feeling. It's an aura. And I get ocular migraine, so I get like an aura. So that's why I came up with this. Like, it's an aura. It's like a thing that I can't really see. It's just often the.
But you know that it's there again.
I know that it's there because, you know, there's pain. And so it's like this feeling, and so I'll have lots of story ideas and I'll write them all down. But until I get that feeling, that aura, it's like a passion that I don't know how to explain where it comes from. But until I have that aura, I can't actually sit down and write. I can't, you know, I need to have that scene that is so vivid in my head that it gives me that aura.
And then once you've captured that with the scene, then you understand how you're going to work the story around.
Then I know, like, okay, so I can have a character doing this, I can have another character doing that. And then once I know the plot, then I can start to work on the characters and what each of, you know, what is their want, what is their need, what is their backstory, do they have brothers or sisters, and how did that affect them? And so I can ask all these questions about their past in order to make them kind of a whole person, a whole character. But it always comes from that aura. And I have to wait for it to come sometimes.
It's absolutely fascinating to hear this, because your last book, Do No Harm, which I'm still haunted by, and haunted in a good way, because it still makes me think, again, what would I do? And how would I handle that particular situation? So, like, you had a completely different aura for a scene that in that book. So how does this work now? If this, thank goodness, is going to be a series of books, how does that aura work now? Do you think
that is a good question, because I am usually quite just open to whatever aura descends upon me, and I'll write that book when I feel like writing it. But because this is a series, I could not do that with the second book, and I had to get it turned in. I had a deadline. So I had to start brainstorming story ideas, and I brainstormed, probably 100 story ideas. And it took me about 2 months. So I think about 2 months of working full time on different, like, kind of not fully fleshed out books, but like the back synopsis, you know, so maybe half of a page, to kind of just see, does this make me feel passionate? Do I love this? Do I want to spend how many hours a day with these people?
Yeah.
Yeah, because you know, I as an author in thrillers, that genre, you know, we write about probably for a first draft anywhere from 80,000 to 100,000 words. So, and quite often even more than that for a first
Yeah.
draft, and then we cut it down, and the final version is usually around 90,000 words. So I have to be like sure of that book, that I love it and that I want to be with those characters
Yeah.
for that amount of time and that amount of writing. So it was tricky, and I was really starting to doubt myself for those first few months, because I was like, no, no, delete, delete, delete. And then I started thinking about, you know, a storyline, and I was like, well, this could be good. And so then I had to go, how will Jess fit into this story and
Gotcha.
her issues, and how
Yeah.
will that go? And then I'd go, oh, it doesn't work, and I'd discard it again. And so
Oh,
that went on for months. Yeah, 2, maybe 3 months. But I did in the end just go, there's nothing that is going to be perfect. I just need to write. And I did. And I wrote a first draft, and I was like, this is not bad. But then I went back and did like heavy edits and
okay.
kind of really sculpted it. And then I sent it off to my editor, and she was like, this is really good, like really good. Here's some ways you can tighten it and strengthen it. So
Yeah.
I think it was harder for me than usual, but because it was a lot more structured. And I find a series harder because you have your characters and your location, but that means there are fixed posts that you have to get to.
Yeah.
You can't change them. It's not that you can't be creative, it's that you can't change them. That world is there. So you just have to create stuff within that world. And I found that tricky. It was my first time doing it. And it didn't start off with the aura, but once I got into it, I was like, this is it. And then the aura came. So it was unusual for me, because I definitely didn't have it at first, but I moved into it. So it was more like I chased the aura and grabbed it. And I was like, come here.
Smart. Yeah. No,
Yeah, I'm really happy with the way it's gone. And
because you just released the cover, didn't you? Or you're
haven't released it yet. I have gotten it, and I'm excited because I have just seen it. I hope to release it this week, to have like a cover reveal this week, but we'll see when it goes live. So yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So please let me know. Joined in conversation with best-selling writer Christina McDonald. These Still Black Waters is her latest, which we've been talking about, which thankfully is a series. So super excited about that. So one of the things Neve's mom talks to her about is that you are more than the worst thing that you've ever done.
Yeah.
Right. It's a pretty profound lesson if we stop and think about it, because you talked at the very beginning about all the different pieces that make up a person.
Yeah.
And together that makes a whole. One piece can't be more than the other, I guess.
Yeah. I think that it was really important for me to write that. And I don't know why. I think so. When I wrote this book, it was at the kind of middle of the pandemic. Okay. And, you know, the world was on fire, basically, you know, metaphorically speaking. But this book kind of speaks to the rupture that tragedy brings, and about our endless quest to put our lives back together after that happens. And so I felt like there was some sort of symmetry in saying in that, right, and balancing that with humans being better than the worst things that they've done. Because at that time, I think we were seeing some really terrible things happen to people and from people. And I, like I was saying earlier, I want to view people with compassion. And so I was looking at like why and how, and so I think, the whole pandemic and then this book, it speaks to the rupture of tragedy within the world and within people. And, and I wanted to look at it from maybe a nicer point of view and just think like people are better than we give them credit for, I think sometimes. Absolutely. You know, and we are only seeing one part of their face, one part of their life, one thing that they're saying. And hopefully, you know, I might be wrong. Maybe people are all bad, but I hope that
I would hope not.
Yeah.
I think it's easier to think that they're not all bad, because otherwise,
what are we doing?
Yeah. But it's amazing. I mean, things impact people, right? I mean, life happens. So how could it not impact? And
Yeah.
certain things that happen to you change the course of your life. I mean,
Yeah.
perfect example is, you in an airport deciding to buy a ticket at the last minute,
Yeah.
and it completely changed.
Going to Ireland, yeah.
Yeah.
Changed the whole, it's sliding doors, right?
Yeah, it's exactly right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
to me, it just, it fascinates me. The other
Absolutely.
thing, there's a line in the book that talks about the statistics on unsolved murders are terrifying.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I shudder to think about your browser and your search history.
I've thought about that so often. Like, if I ever got arrested for something small and the police like searched my computer, it would look
Yeah.
really dark. But
Yeah.
I think I'm an author, so what can you do?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like you pull out, like, no, like I'm an author, so you just
Yeah.
pull out a
Yeah.
card and they go, oh, okay, no problem.
Exactly.
So
They have to
yeah.
get it.
Can you share a little bit about in this book? So I'm talking with Christina McDonald, bestselling writer, These Still Black Waters, about your philosophy on debtors versus collectors.
Oh, okay. Remind me of what the quote was, because this was a long time ago that I wrote this book. Do you have
They
the
talk
quote
about
there?
that some people just collect and basically take,
Oh, yeah.
and
Okay.
some people are essentially givers.
Yeah. So Neve was talking about Bailey, wasn't she?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
that was kind of Neve's observation about how, so Neve's a bit of a pessimist and she's quite angry at people and the way that her life has turned out in some ways. And so she's thinking about this woman who wronged her, but she wasn't able to see it at the time, and so when you reflect back on people and you're like, this person was this way, and so she was kind of putting Bailey, her friend from when she was a child, into a box
Yeah.
and saying, this is a woman who takes what she wants from people, and in life there are people who take and people who give, the debtors
Mhm.
and the collectors,
Right.
and you essentially saying you need to be wise enough to be able to distinguish between the two, and she
Mhm.
hadn't been wise enough then to
Yeah.
distinguish that, but she was a she was a kid, she was a teenager
Yeah.
at the time.
Exactly.
So, but now she's wise enough and she's like, I'm not falling for your tricks anymore, lady.
Yeah, I mean, I think that those of us who don't learn from history, right, are kind of doomed to repeat it. So I think if you
Yeah.
can learn from that and
Yeah.
distinguish between the two, then
Yeah.
all the better.
Totally. And I think that's what Neve is sort of realizing, that she's like, you played me once and I'm not going to let it
Mhm.
happen again.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's a line where you talk about life being a choice, and everyone has the potential for great good and great wrong, but those who make the wrong decision usually pay somewhere down the line.
So that's again, that's from the killer's point of view, and that's again
Uh-huh.
about like consequences.
Uh-huh.
And the killer sees things in a very black and white way. So you're
Mhm.
wrong or you're right, and if you're
Mhm.
wrong, you deserve your punishment, and she is going to give you that punishment. She or he
Yeah,
is going to give you that
I was going to say, because it
punishment.
didn't come to them. So she has to make
Exactly.
sure that happens,
Yeah.
or he has to make sure that happens.
Yeah, they have to make sure that it happens in order
Yeah.
to eke out that punishment. And this
Yeah.
person thinks that they are in the position to be able to do that now, and some people deserve it.
Yes. So the other thing that I'm struck by is, the Jess and Neve are very different and at the same
Yeah,
time very similar in terms of the relationships with their significant others, their
yeah,
partner husbands. Can you
yeah.
talk a little bit about those dynamics
So
and how
Neve
they
and her
influence?
partner is Neve is so, she's done some terrible things in the past, and I think the knowledge of that has
Mhm.
really colored her ability to love with her full heart. So she loves her husband, loves her partner, but she also holds parts of herself back because she wants him to think that she is perfect. And nobody is perfect, but because of that, she only shows him the parts that she thinks he'll want to see. Whereas Jess is, I mean, her husband Mac has seen her at her worst and her best. And I love their relationship. And I actually hope that I get to write a book in the future where I can bring Mac into this, like a new story, and like bring him into it, because I love his
Yes,
support for her.
I
You know,
do too.
despite the things that they've been through,
Yeah.
I love their relationship, and I love how much she loves him. But in this case, she is also punishing herself, and
Hmm.
they both feel, this is
Yes.
one of their similarities, is that they both feel that they are not deserving of that wholehearted love. And and Neve, for reasons that she's never explained to her husband, but
Right.
just for reasons of like mistakes that she's made. So whatever
Right.
the reasons may be, hidden or not, they, you know, they've made these mistakes, and they feel like they're not worthy of that love that they are being given.
Yeah. I think, along the lines of your books making us think, right, about what we would do, or, how we would approach a particular situation. I think there's so much relatability. I think everybody listening at one point or another has felt that, that they haven't
Thank
deserved
you.
something.
That means
So
a lot. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the key to writing a compelling character, is that they are relatable in some way. And I know that there's something to be said for unlikable characters, and
mhm,
you know, probably all of my characters in some form or another are unlikable, but I want readers to understand why they're unlikable, or why they've done
yeah,
these things wrong, not just that they're unlikable because, some vague reason. I want readers to understand and be able to relate to why they are the way they are. So
absolutely.
you can write a terrible character, you can write the worst antagonist or anti-hero or whatever, but as long as the reader understands why, and that the writer has written them with compassion,
Right.
I think then it can be successful,
Yeah.
successful character.
Absolutely. I think that's the thing, is these characters resonate. Either we
Yeah.
feel like them, or we know somebody who we were like, "Oh my gosh, that's so like so
Yeah.
and so."
Yeah.
And it's also why your books are great for discussion, because, there's not the concrete, there's not the absolutes, but there's the nuances that, kind of make us who we are, and the
Yeah.
choices that we've made, and if we would have chosen differently, what would the outcome have been? And we'll
Yeah.
never know, right? You choose that ticket to Ireland. I just think that's such a great story. You choose that, and your life unfolds in a completely different direction than had you just,
Yeah.
not.
Stayed in America.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It is. Yeah. I think about that all the time. What would have happened? Maybe I would have ended up in London and met my husband anyways if I hadn't gotten on a plane to Ireland. But
no, there's that whole concept of fate, right? Like,
yeah.
you said it earlier, right? You said that sometimes where we're the destination, or the end point, that where
Yeah.
we're going is where we're supposed to be, but we took very different paths to get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I think life is short, and I think sometimes it's about just kind of enjoying that
Yeah.
journey,
Yeah.
instead of being so focused, I think, on the
Yeah.
destination.
Yeah. And I think that's probably easier to do and to understand now that I'm a bit older. But when I was younger, I was always about the destination. I wanted to
Absolutely.
get there, get there, get there. And if you're doing that, if you're rushing and you're hurrying, you're not noticing and seeing and creating deep ties with people, and deep
Mhm.
ties with your surroundings. And but I mean, I don't always do it, but I think now that I'm a bit older, it's a bit easier.
Absolutely. I mean, that's that whole gift of hindsight, right? You alluded to
Right.
it
Yeah.
earlier. Like, you can look back on things and go, "Oh, maybe
Yeah.
that's why that happened, or that's why
Yeah.
that person did that, or that's why I acted this way."
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't live in hindsight.
Yeah.
So it creates this interesting tension as to, can I look back, and then can I learn from that, so that when I move forward, things are
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. But I think that takes a certain type of person that can be really introspective like that can actually stop and think about how things went and how they can go in the future and make iterations on that. And I have a background in digital copywriting and user experience. So that's where I came from. And so I'm like, okay, how did this journey go? And how can I make it better? And so I'm analytical in that way. And I think that really helps me as an author, because I can
Oh,
think about my
absolutely.
characters and like, how did they get to where they are? And they need to think about this now going forward. And
but without like over complicating it,
Yeah.
either. It's done so beautifully. So I'm in conversation with bestselling writer Christina McDonald, These Still Black Waters. The other thing that I'm struck by is just, big concepts, right? Are you more than the worst thing that you've done? And then you throw in these little details that Neve's dinner table is round.
Oh yeah.
It's just one of those things where there's,
I don't know where that came from.
I don't know. There's no head of the table. It's round so that everybody's at the head.
I think that came from, so I grew up in a really Christian household. So I grew up in like a really evangelical Christian household. And my mom was like, man is the head of the table. And then I grew up and I was like, no, I am equal there. I just kind of things like that, like, little things that I remember from when I was a kid and how I view them differently now. And so I don't even have a round table. I have a square table. But just like that came to me as I was writing it. And I was like, oh, I wonder if Neve would feel this way. Yes, she would. I'm going to write that.
I just think that's the interesting part of being a writer is you having these conversations. I'm envisioning them as conversations. I don't know what they look like with your characters, right? And whether or not your character would do this. Is this in keeping with who the character is or is not? To me, I think that's kind of cool. The other thing you talk a little bit about in this book is intentionally or not, we only focus on what we focus on.
Things we want to think about.
Nobody wants to think about, like, we think if we don't think about it, that it never happened, or if we think we don't think about it, then it's not going to impact us. And
I think, compartmentalizing and I can be quite good at it. I think probably most people can be quite good at it, but I think it also takes practice, and it's something that people who have maybe been through a trauma or through, things happening in their background, in their life, it can happen to them more often, and it can become quite dangerous. Like in Neve's case, it can become quite dangerous when you compartmentalize to such an extreme. But it is a coping mechanism as well, so it's not a bad thing, I don't think. But I would say that, well, I think probably most psychologists would say if you do it too much, isn't it disassociating, or I can't remember what it's called. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's the other thing. These two characters, Neve and Jess, there's both have this incredible strength, right?
Yeah.
And talking a little bit about it, there's a line in the book, something to the effect of like, if you're waiting, for encouragement or validation externally, from outside, you're going to be waiting a really long time. And I think a lot of us can relate to that. But I also think it's really cool that both of those characters kind of embody that finding it within themselves, that sense of strength in the face of such tragedy.
Yeah. I think especially in the face of tragedy, people do need to because tragedy and trauma is so lonely. Like you're the only one, even if there's other people who are suffering the same tragedy or the same trauma, you're the only one going through your own journey. And so it can be very lonely and isolating. And so, I think, it's hard.
It's very hard. So I'm joined in conversation. This is like one of the best days ever with best-selling writer Christina McDonald. These Still Black Waters is your latest. The other thing is that's touched upon in the book is redemption. So, and how it's kind of different for everyone.
I mean, I think that's exactly it. It's just everybody has, it's just like a point of view, like somebody's point of view, right? I can view something very differently than you will view something. And so, of course, different people will have different ideas of what their version of redemption is. And that may come through forgiveness. It may come through compartmentalizing and pretending it didn't happen. It may come through, various ways. But the only way we're ever going to feel right is by getting that redemption that we feel is redemption. So we can define it how we want to. And these characters have to, Neve learns to define redemption in her own way.
Yeah, so this is just a fascinating story. And so I figured what we would take a minute to do before we kind of morph to towards the end is you have provided a book,
Yes.
an assigned bookmark. So the first person that emails popular@cpl.org with the Still Black Waters in the subject line, I will send you a copy of Christina's book and a signed bookmark. So super generous of you. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's so fun. And I have to say that you make my job as a librarian pretty easy. Because we're always trying to match. I feel like I'm a matchmaker. You try to find the right person for the right book.
Yeah.
And when you start talking to people and you get to know what they're looking for, and I'm like, oh well, you need to read this. We can't keep it on the shelf in the popular department.
Really? Oh, yeah. That's really good to hear.
Yeah, so it's really kind of fun.
And take a picture of it on the shelf because that would mean a lot to me. I love, like, I'm not even exaggerating when I say that libraries saved my life. When I was a kid, when I was about 12 years old, my house caught on fire, and so my mom was a single mom. My mom, my sisters, and I, we were homeless for a bit, and she was able to use a friend's motorhome, but it was really, really cold that winter. I grew up in Seattle. It was never cold in the winter.
Damp and cold.
Yeah. Of course, that winter it was like snowy and really cold. So when we came home from school and I was in, I think 4th, maybe 5th grade, it was too cold. Like we didn't have a fireplace. We didn't have anything. It was too cold to sit there. So we would actually go to the library and read. And I think that's where my love of books and reading came from, is we'd go to the library, I'd do my homework, and then I would just browse the shelves and I would chat to the librarians. And it really was such a wonderful time in my life. I mean, it sounds really weird to say, but it really was so fulfilling and wonderful. And I read so many books, and it wasn't sad or scary at all during that time. And it's because I was in a library. I felt safe and warm and loved. So yeah.
So yeah, thank you to those librarians out in the Seattle area. I mean, it just makes me curious now, like every time after talking to a lot of writers, when they talk about being in the library and talking to librarians and browsing the shelves, and, I keep thinking, like, when people are walking through like the stacks, like, ooh, I wonder if that's, that person's going to be a writer someday. You never know.
Yeah.
Never know. So I want to say a huge thank you before we move into the final 5 questions for joining us. Huge thank you to our tech team, Mike Young, making sure everything goes smoothly, all of you watching. So final 5 questions. Okay. What is a book that everybody talks about that you haven't read yet?
Anything by Agatha Christie.
Wow.
I know.
Wow. Did not think that was going to be your answer. Wow.
I keep thinking I should. And you want to know, I actually ordered all of them. I have like a set of, well, not all of them, but I have a set of like 6 or 7 of them. And I keep starting and I'm like, no.
Well, sometimes if it doesn't hit you right away, it's okay. Just not the right time to read them. That's all.
Yeah, it's not the right time. So I will pick them up again soon.
Ironically, I just read, maybe you try this, Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express was made into a graphic novel.
Oh,
so fun. Who knew?
I've seen the movie. So I feel like, I've seen the movie. So I don't know if I should read the book after seeing the movie. Yeah.
But just like seeing how much is conveyed in like these little cells. Pictures.
Yeah. I should get my kids to read those. They love graphic novels.
Yeah. What is your favorite meal?
Ooh, enchiladas. Love them. Love Mexican food.
Really? Well, it's Taco Tuesday. At least it is here in my house. So, who would you take a road trip with? Neve or Jess?
Oh, ooh.
Not on a motorcycle, assuming.
I was just gonna say, well, like I can't go on a Jess. Yeah. Yeah.
She's so interesting. I cannot wait to
cool see. And like thoughtful, and I love her. Yeah, I just love her. I think she'd be fun as well.
Yeah. I probably know the answer to this, but I'm gonna ask anyway. Do you ever watch the movie without reading the book?
Yeah.
You're not normally a movie.
I can't think of what, because I don't.
Don't watch a lot of movies.
Don't watch a lot of movies. I've watched all of the Bond movies without having read any of the books.
Okay.
So yeah. So I would,
Cool.
yeah, for sure.
And then the last question, what is the best thing about living in London?
The best thing about living in London is that I'm never far from the city or countryside. I'm like 20 to 30 minutes from either, like proper downtown London or the countryside. Like where I live is equidistant, and anywhere you are in London, it's so green. There are so many green parks. You could walk straight across London for miles and miles and miles, and you could stay in a green park the whole time. And I love that it's, you know, it's beautiful. We have all these castles and like history, but then there's green parks, but then it's busy and there's a vibe to it too. So you just kind of have the best of all the worlds.
Absolutely. Are you a tea drinker?
I do. Yeah, I do drink.
I mean, I'm from Seattle, home of Starbucks. So that's
yeah,
the question.
I'm a coffee drinker too. But I have tea first thing in the morning. It's like my comfort drink. And then after I've had my tea, then I have coffee.
There you go.
So I have both.
Yeah. So I just want to say thank you again. And
thank you so much for having me here. It's been such a pleasure.
Yeah. Make sure you all go and get these Still Black Waters, and then you'll want to read her entire backlist because absolutely incredible storyteller. So thank you all for joining us. I know, like, duck down. Yeah. Do no harm, the Night Olivia Fell, and Behind Every Lie. So awesome. Thank you so much,
Jen. It's been really such a pleasure being here, and I'm
likewise.
Lovely to meet you. Thank you, everybody.